head over to quarterbacks. We're just going to talk about a few of them here and talk about their potential fantasy relevancy for this coming season, if at all. We got to start, in all due respect, to the number one quarterback off the board this draft. It was kind of a surprise, frankly. I mean, all the quarterbacks and where they were going to go was a surprise, but I think most experts, had Johnny Football going off the board first. However, the Jacksonville Jaguars kind of surprised a lot of people and picked up Jake Bortles with the 3rd overall pick, first quarterback off the board, coming from UCF, respectively. So what do we think about Bortles, his talent level there and the competition that he played and his potential NFL future there for Jacksonville?
I would just like to say one thing real quick. I want to make a public apology to Mr. Johnny Manziel. The reason that you dropped so far, sir, was because your name was picked for me in the fantasy league's draft order thing that we did, and that is why you dropped so far. So go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, we'll get into Manziel. Bortles. Okay, first of all, Bortles, he's a real good talent. He really came on strong this year. Before this, he was virtually unknown. No one knew who he was. No one knew where he came from. But he's a big guy. He's kind of a Ben Roethlisberger type, honestly, and I think that's his true upside. I think Jaguars lucked out, and they did not draft another Blaine Gabbert. So God bless him. They didn't screw this one up. He's big, accurate pocket passer, and I think that's something that they're really going to need to kind of help develop. He's not going to start. They already came out and said it. He's something where I would keep an eye on him as the season progresses. I think my quote of this guy is basically he's not fantasy draftable unless you're in a 12-man league with 2 quarterbacks in your lineup and you need a 3rd. So basically there's roughly 35 quarterbacks that are better than this guy. But other than that, I think he's really good.
Yeah, I don't see him starting right out of the gate. They've definitely, the ownership there has kind of come down and pretty much said that. I mean, he'll compete in training camp and so forth, but I think the journeyman, Chad Henne, will start there. I think Bortles might get some starts towards the end of the year. He might end up being the starter in the latter part of the season. But the problem with this guy, is he doesn't have any wide receivers. I mean, like we mentioned, Justin Blackmon's probably gone in all likelihood. He's pretty much just has Cecil Shorts and their new rookie and Lee, so he doesn't have a whole lot of options to throw to. Definitely do not think he's fantasy relevant at all in redraft leagues. It'll just be interesting to see just kind of how that drama unfolds. So let's move on to one Mr. Johnny Football, coming from Texas A&M to the Browns. The Browns, people thought they might draft him with the 4th overall pick, but they traded down. But he ended up being there at pick 22 for the Browns' 2nd pick in the 1st round because of their awesome trade to get rid of Trent I Suck Richardson. And they scooped him up. I mean, I think they wanted him all along. They ended up getting their guy. Unfortunately, you saw Johnny crying in his beer that Josh Gordon is likely not going to play. But actually, a little nugget here that I thought was interesting. Johnny, back at his hometown, one of his favorite bars there in A&M, right around the college there, he was there prior to the draft. He left his credit card number with the bartender, the owner, or whatnot. And the moment after he was drafted, the bartender bought a round of beers and shots for every single person in the bar on behalf of Johnny Football. So I thought that was cool. That goes with his bad boy mantra. So we'll see how that pans out for him in the NFL season. But what do we think about Johnny? Again, he's a running quarterback. We like those in fantasy football. But he did probably, in all likelihood, lose Josh Gordon. And he also got to compete with Brian Hoyer, who actually looked pretty good before he got hurt last season.
All right, so Jadeveon Clowney's the freak show. Johnny Manziel is the sideshow. Quite frankly, the dude's just a walking circus wherever he goes. The Browns GM and management basically came out and said, you are a backup quarterback. You need to start acting as such. That was basically Poppy saying, come sit down on my knee here, Sonny. We're done with you. So that's kind of the way you need to look at Johnny Manziel. He is a freak of nature when he moves outside of the pocket, though, and I will say that much. He had something like 2,600 yards in the last 26 games from scrambling. That's something you got to kind of keep an eye on. I don't know how well that'll translate into the NFL. I don't know if that'll translate at all. But that's just something that I kind of like took an interest on. He, again, is kind of like Bortles, where he's kind of a wait and see. I think he's got more talent than a Tim Tebow. But I think that's maybe what they got in him. I don't know how long he'll last. I think the city will rally behind him because they're the Browns. They just got a movie made after them, Draft Day. And unfortunately, I think they ended up with the wrong quarterback. So,
well, let's talk about that pick where he fell. I mean, he fell to pick 22, and as it was pointed out all over the internet after they picked him, that the past 3 quarterbacks that they've picked, including Manziel, were at pick 22 of the first round. And how did they end up? Not so great. So we'll see what happens there. Maybe it's a curse or something like that. Again,
Tim Couch is a great man.
We love
Tim
him.
Couch wasn't one of them, actually. It was Brady Quinn and Hoyer, I believe. Anyway, yeah, Johnny Manziel, his scrambling, you're right, Jim. The guy can run like the wind. The question is, and I agree with you, will that translate to the NFL? I think this guy starts running around like that. He's going to get hit so hard that he may think twice about leaving that pocket again. But if he ends up getting the starting job there, I'd definitely keep an eye on him. Somebody that might produce some points for you.
Yeah, let's not forget, we mentioned Tim Tebow. Obviously, the guy could not throw to save his life. However, he was averaging 20 to 25 fantasy points when he was a starter in Denver. So he is relevant. I'm not so sure Johnny's gonna start out the season as the starter, but there's going to be so much pressure on management and the coaching staff and ownership and so forth if he doesn't start. And if they're losing or losing some games and Hoyer's in there or so not. So definitely keep an eye out on him. We're going to move now to Teddy Bridgewater out of Louisville. He was drafted in the first round as well. The Vikings moved up and traded picks and got him as the last pick of the first round. I actually think Teddy Bridgewater has the highest chance of starting the season as the starter than any of these other rookies. Just because of the situation he finds himself in Minnesota with Matt Castle and Christian Ponder and his smoking hot wife. Because I think he's probably going to end up winning that job. He was also kind of known as the most probably NFL-ready quarterback out of the draft class from everything I read. Doesn't have the strongest arm in the world, but he was the most NFL-ready a coach, according to all the NFL draft experts. So, Jimmer, what do we think about Teddy and his chances in Minnesota, pairing him up with your man crush, Cordell Patterson and Adrian Peterson?
Unfortunately, I personally don't think he's going to get a chance to throw to him outside of practice. That's just my take on it. I think he's going to get groomed by Matt Castle. I think he has the chance to get in there pending injuries. But quite frankly, I just don't quite see him as a starter yet. He definitely has a lot of the intangibles. A lot of stuff the Combine kind of brought up is that he's missing a few key elements in his game. He couldn't quite make all the passes. He couldn't quite do everything you thought he was capable of or what you saw in game film. In game film, you saw just a ton more than I expected, and that's kind of what his value is there, is what you actually see him do in games. So with that, I just don't think he's draftable in fantasy leagues.
Okay. So, Jim, or any other quarterbacks you want to mention? Derek Carr was, drafted to the Raiders. We got Logan Thomas to the Cardinals. One Mr. A.J. McCarron went off to Cincinnati in the 5th round. He dropped considerably, and Taj Boyd to the Jets. Any of those guys you want to talk about?
Yeah, let me just each one of those real quick talk about. Derek Carr might be the dumbest human being ever to be drafted. I'm going to go ahead and say that, and he's a perfect fit for the dumbest franchise in the NFL history. That's the Oakland Raiders. Logan Thomas, for some reason the GM went and visited him twice. I have no idea why, and that doesn't quite fully make sense to me. So maybe eventually he could be Carson Palmer's heir, which sounds weird to say, but that's a possibility. A.J. McCarron, he got drafted. Can we all just collectively laugh for a second? Okay, let's do it again. He's just whatever. He's so overrated. It's scary. But let's Taj Boyd. He was probably one of my favorites going into this, and unfortunately, he went to the Jets. Highly doubt he's going to play there. Unfortunately, he's going to be at best a Kellen Clemens 6 years from now, where he goes, wins a few games for someone, gets another $5 million check, goes to the next team for a year, wins a few games for them, goes to the next team, gets another couple million. He's going to be one of those guys, and that's unfortunate because he was a top 5 quarterback going into the season and left the season being drafted in the 6th round, and that hurts. So sorry, Taj.
All right, well, that wraps up the quarterback conversation. We're going to move to our last potential fantasy relevant group, and that is the tight ends. We're just going to talk about a couple of them. So the first tight end off the board, I think it was a little bit of a surprise coming that early, was Eric Ebron coming from North Carolina. He proposed to his future wife, current fiance, there in New York City the day before the draft, or maybe the day of the draft. It's pretty awesome. Just find that on YouTube. But he goes to the Detroit Lions. So, Jimmer, why don't you talk about Ebron and his potential, and then we'll have Jay kind of discuss what he thinks about his Detroit Lions picking Ebron with their first overall pick.
The guy doesn't make sense. He's basically a wide receiver with the tight end's body. I mean, he's fast, he's big, he's got hands. He played at North Carolina, which makes no sense. I mean, was he trying to play basketball? I never fully got that one. He is one of those guys where, you know, he could very well be the next Jimmy Graham, and I think that's truly, he's one of those hybrid guys where, hey, pay me as a wide receiver because I'm not a tight end. So that's kind of what he is. I would keep an eye on him. I don't think he's draftable. I don't think he's going to break the top 10 in tight ends this year. Dynasty leagues, definitely keep an eye on this guy. I mean, is he a first-round draft pick? No, but he's definitely worth keeping an eye on. I think actually the Lions kind of reached a little bit for him. I was kind of surprised because I thought he'd be available in the 20 selection, even maybe into the 2nd round. So, Jay, tell me, what the hell were your beloved Lions thinking?
Well, they're thinking he was the second best wide receiver in the draft, is what they were thinking. And that's exactly what they're going to use him for. I mean, we know Jimmy Graham lines up as a true tight end only 30% of the time. Tim Twentyman, who's the beat reporter for the Lions, did report that they intend to use Ebron in a Jimmy Graham role. So that means he'll be lining up as a wide receiver. This guy, believe it or not, is going to be a top 10 tight end this year.
You heard it here first, folks.
They do. Yeah, they do. Look, they don't have any other tight ends that can catch the ball there. They got Joseph Foria, who is a good end zone target because he's so big. That's it. He can stand there and go, throw me ball. But he doesn't have much to him besides that. And we all know Pettigrew's hands are made out of stone or wood,
bricks or rock or concrete.
Something that balls bounce off of every time they come in his vicinity. So neither of those guys are even going to be an issue. This guy's going to get every tight end target this year minus a couple red zone targets. So, yes, in a passing offense like this, he's going to be a hell of a freaking guy to have.
So my two thoughts on Ebron, I think that's our resident Lions fan optimistic view, as all Lions fans have in the preseason.
Fuck you.
I don't see him as a top 10 at all. But he is dynamic. A couple little tidbits here. Him and his fellow teammate Giovanni Bernard had a little bet apparently of who would run the faster 40 at the combine, and Eric beat Giovanni Bernard's 40 in the combine as a tight end, as a man who is like 3 times the size of Giovanni Bernard. So that was pretty interesting to me. I think the Lions regret signing Pettigrew this offseason. I don't think they knew about their plan, obviously, of drafting this guy as their first overall pick. So, you know, I see him as probably his history does not bear out that tight ends do well in their rookie season. It's very few and far between. He is going to a good offense for it, but to think that he's a top 10, I think, is optimistic. I see him as, you know, outside the top 15 probably in his rookie season, but I think there's good things for him to come moving forward. So We're going to go ahead and move on to the second and last potentially relevant tight end, even worth talking about in fantasy circles, and that's Austin Safarian Jenkins, if I even said that right, tight end from Washington. They drafted him in the second round with the 6th overall pick. So a guy that you draft that high, that you reach for, typically gets playing time. Going over to the Buccaneers, they also drafted, of course, wide receiver there, and they have Vincent Jackson and so on. So, Jimmer, I didn't see this guy play that much at all in college. You know, what did you see from him, and do you think he has any relevancy or any dynasty relevancy moving forward?
Yeah, guy's a monster. And I'm going to keep referring to him as a head case because he doesn't quite make sense. You'll see one game he'll blow up a team for 150 yards and 2 TDs, and the next week he'll show up with 30 yards and 4 drop catches. Like, he just doesn't quite make sense. It doesn't. He's up and down. He definitely is probably the only guy in this draft that I would say is a Gronk, and the reason why I say he's a Gronk is because he's just not going to probably play a bunch, and he's most likely to get hurt. And I think that's kind of the funny part about him, in kind of a crude and mean way. But a lot of motivation issues, I think, in the situation he's at with the Bucks. Man, I don't know. He's a wild card at best. I think there's a couple other guys to keep an eye on. Colt Laera. There's a big guy out of Big 12. I'm trying to remember his name, from Wisconsin. He might be someone to kind of keep an eye on. And Michigan State has a guy. So, I mean, there's a couple other tight ends, but honestly, none of them are fantasy relevant. Stick with the guys that we know. I'm probably going to try and keep Tony Gonzalez again this year. I'm sure he's going to make a comeback. So pretty thin tight end draft.
Well, so Jimmer, this guy, I mean, he ran a 4.56 40 at the combine. He's definitely got some speed. The only competition he has there is Brandon Myers, who we all know isn't worth the tight end paper he's written on. But Tim Wright did flash at times last season. I mean, was Jenkins? Is he does he have skills from a blocking tight end perspective, or is he strictly kind of a wide receiver tight end?
I've seen him mail it in a few times blocking. So I mean, if he gets the right coach and he gets the right guy to kind of put his head on straight and motivate him properly, he could be very, very good. But he's just had a lot of those issues. And Steve Sarkisian, who's his coach this last couple of years up in Washington, he's a good coach. And quite frankly, they couldn't figure him out to save his life. And then every once in a while, he'd just show these brilliant games, and you're like, man, he did everything. He blocked, he caught. I don't know. He's a little streaky, and it doesn't quite make sense to me. There's something else going on there. So I did not see the full scouting report on him. I do know that he is talented.
All right, guys. Well, that's going to wrap it up for our special NFL Draft recap show. On our next show, we'll be breaking down and tiering the top 25 fantasy wide receivers for 2014 and comparing our rankings to the current ADP of Fantasy Football Calculator. So go ahead and tune in to see how we're going to match up there. Again, as a reminder, we are live every 2 weeks in the off season. We'll be going to every week once we get closer to the start of the NFL season. So tune in this coming Friday, 2 weeks from now, May 23rd, for our next live hangout. In the meantime, download this show on iTunes, find us on Stitcher Radio, and check out our previous shows on the Red Zone Warriors Fantasy Football Show YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter and tweet us all your fantasy football questions at Red Zone Warriors. So for the Cushman and the Jimmer, I am Rob Smith, and remember, if you are taking a fantasy football off season, then you are already losing. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.